All right, in this tutorial we're going to get an idea of what compositing is. Basically, we're going to bring together a number of different objects, assets, media assets, and layer them in a manner that creates a new final visual, a new final graphic. You can do this with just still images. Of course, that's what a lot of what you see in magazines, any type of print material, is going to be composited together with several different elements. In After Effects, we can composite, layer things together, and create animations. So in this project, what we're going to do, in this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a few graphic images, background, a picture, and then we're going to build a lower third for that image and animate that lower third in. So let's get started on that. And what we need to do first of all, and these assets, these media pieces will be available to you on the link under the video. You can download those, and we need to import those. So I'm going to go ahead, double click in here to the project panel, and I'm going to navigate to where I have those and import those. So wherever you have those sitting at this point, go ahead and import these two pieces for the project. And they should be the background JPEG and then this Ethan W PSD. So you can select both of those by clicking and dragging underneath here. Select both of those and hit open. It's going to import those two files, and you'll see them here now in the project panel. You can click on them. You can see what the thumbnail that represents them. We have this background JPEG. It's 1280 by 720. And then we have the PSD. That's my son there. And it is also set at 1280 by 720. That's the raster size of this image, 1280 by 720. So we've got that, but what we need to do is we need to start a new composition. So let's go up here to Composition, New Composition, and let's go with 1280 by 720, 24 frames, and we'll set this one at 10 seconds also. So once you have those set, 1280, 720, 24 frames, 10 seconds, let's hit OK on that. And now we have our composition ready to work in. And here's the composition represented in our project panel. So if we lose it, we can double click here and open it back up. And then of course also we still have our two pieces there. This is a JPEG, and you can, of course, as you see, import JPEGs. This is going to be a lot of pictures that's going to come in as JPEGs, things like that. Any type of graphics that you build can possibly be JPEGs. And those are pixel-based images. Let's go ahead and click on that background, and let's drag that into the composition and just drop it down here in the timeline. This is an easy way. If you drag it into the timeline, drop it down in there, it's an easy way for that image to get in the timeline and then also get into the viewer centered. Okay, this way we don't have to, because if I drag it in this way, it's going to come in. If I drop it, it's going to be wherever I put it, and we're just going to have to do a little work to get that centered, and we don't really want that. So most of the time I'll just drag straight down into the timeline, and that'll set it up centered. All right, so we've got that. That's our background, and let's look at this. As we pointed out in the previous tutorial, that we have for this the 5 basic properties you can see here. So we can animate this. Now for this, I think maybe a little bit later we'll animate the opacity. But for right now, we want to just kind of look at building this image first. So that's going to be our background. You can see it's just a blue background with a gradient on it going from blue to white here. Created that in Photoshop and then saved it out as a JPEG and brought it in. The next image that we want the image of Ethan there. 1280 by 720 is going to fit well into our frame. No problems there. We're not going to need to adjust it or anything. So let's click on that and drag down into the timeline. Now the thing that I want you to notice is we can drag it below the background, or we can drop it on top of the background. And really what we want to do is drop it on the top of the background. And you can see the little black line that appears there showing, indicating that we're ready to drop it in place. So we drop it there, and now the picture shows up on top of the background, and that's the way we want it. Now, just to start emphasizing this concept, we've just composited. We're using two separate elements. We've brought them together. We've laid them out in the viewer. They're on, one's on top of the other, and we have created an image. Okay, so two separate images, brought them together, and we've created a new image out of that. So this is the basics of compositing. And you'll also see that we have layers here. And again, that is a basic of compositing, is that you're going to use multiple pieces of media to create a new final piece. All right. So again, with this object, you also have the 5 basic transform properties underneath there. Just want to point that out and emphasize that. So any of these two pieces can be animated. All right, let's build a lower third for Ethan here. And I'm going to turn this on, choose grid and guide options, just to show you something. We're going to click on this title action safe. Now these lines are not going to composite into our final scene. They will not show up. These are just guides for us. So if we want to make sure that this image, this lower third, is going to show up on screen when it is played back, because there are some screens that it may crop some of this area here. To be safe, we want to come inside here. Actually, to really be safe, we want to be in here. But usually I will push it no further than here on the title safe area. So we're going to take a look at that, and we'll begin to initially set up our lower third. Now, lower third, hopefully you know what that is. It is just a identifier usually used on a person to give their name and possibly a title, who they're affiliated with, that sort of thing. So this is what we're going to, a super, sometimes what they might call them. So we're going to build a lower third for Ethan here. And we're going to continue the concept of compositing, of building this final piece here. We're going to use a new tool up here, and we're going to draw some shapes, simple shapes. This new tool here is called the rectangle tool, or at least starts out as the rectangle tool. You can come up here, hover over it. We have the rectangle tool. If you click on it and hold, it's going to give us the list of tools that we have that we can use, or the shapes that we can draw. So we'll have the rectangle tool, a rounded rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon, and a star tool. So these are the different shapes that we can draw. You can really get into a lot, especially with the polygon and the star tool later on, create all kinds of different shapes. But for right now, what we want to do is we can either go to the rectangle tool or the rounded rectangle tool. I'm going to select that in just a minute. But before I do that, I'm going to make sure, because this tool has two separate uses. One is to draw shapes, which we're about to do. The other is to draw a mask. And we don't want to draw a mask right now. And the way that that mask tool is activated is if we have a layer down here selected. If we have the layer down here selected and we select this tool, it's going to draw a mask. We're not going to get into that right now. So what we want to make sure is that we have no layers down here selected. And we can do that by simply clicking into the empty area down here. Click into that, make sure nothing is selected. Now we can come up here, and I'm going to select the rounded rectangle tool to begin to build the base of the lower third. And once you have that tool, you can see you have this crosshairs here. And in the viewer area, we can click and begin to drag our shape. Now, based on what you have selected, your colors may look quite a bit different than mine do, and I'll explain that in a minute. But let's get this basic shape here of building this lower third. All right, once you let go, your shape is created. A couple of things have happened. Of course, the shape is right there in the viewer. And then we also have down in here in the timeline what is labeled as shape layer 1. So we have created this shape, and it is showing up in both places. All right, to work with this shape, I still have the shape tool selected at this point. I'm going to come over here to the selection tool and click on it, just so I'm no longer drawing any more shapes. And at this point, I can click on this and I can move it around. Okay. Now we kind of had it where we wanted it, but let's go ahead and just kind of center that back up, drop it in there just a little bit. But we have that shape. All right, so let's make sure this shape layer is selected, and I want to explain a couple of things. You'll see here that mine has a gradient, and that's probably set from whatever I was doing last with the shape tool. I'm going to fix that fill right in there, that fill color. And there are some properties that we can adjust. So we have the shape layer selected here. Up here at the top of the viewer, we have the word fill, and then we have this thumbnail right here that shows the fill color, which is this gradient at this point. And then we have the stroke, which I do not have a stroke on this right now. You can't see that. And it shows that I have no stroke on it. We'll probably add a stroke in just a moment, but we want to clean up this fill first. Now, you may be wondering, what is this right here? It's not a stroke. That's going to disappear, especially once we click off of the image. You see that bounding box, and that's what it's called, is the bounding box. That just lets us know the size of this image, and this one is restricted to the image. Some bounding boxes might be a little bit larger. Let's see. The bounding box for Ethan here is this perimeter here. Okay, it's not right here on him like this. So this shows us the full size of the image. What is in here is an alpha channel. We'll get into that later. But there is information in there. It's just the alpha channel, and the alpha channel tells us what part of the image is seen and not seen. Okay, and so we're not seeing a lot of the image there. And that is what we want. But that's the bounding box for Ethan there. And that bounding box, if we want to, we can choose to adjust the size of the image using that bounding box. So you can see how we can move that around. Basically, we're affecting the scale of the image by doing this. We can even flip him to the other side if we want to. So you can see that bounding box can be helpful. All right, I'm going to undo that, Command Z. And so this is the bounding box. Let me select that shape layer. This is the bounding box for this shape. I'm not going to adjust it right now, but just want you to understand what that is. That is not the stroke. All right, let's go fix this fill. If I click on the word fill, it's going to give me some options here. First, I can get rid of the fill, as you see, or I can go with a solid color, and that's what we're going to go with here for just a minute. Like I just had, there can be a linear gradient, or there can be a radial gradient, and you can adjust that radial gradient and do a number of things with this gradient. Gradient can be very helpful in a lot of ways, create some really interesting designs. For right now, what I want to go with is this solid color here. And we're not going to worry about the blending mode or the opacity at this point. Let's just select that as a solid, hit OK, and then the color we can choose. We can click there on the thumbnail for the color picker. It brings open the color picker, and there's a couple of ways we can do this. What I'm going to go with is I can select a color in here, or I can use this eyedropper. So to kind of go with the colors that's in the shirt, to go with this theme here, I'm going to grab the color picker, and then I'm going to come into the image, and what I want to do is I want to try to get this yellow, or at least close to this yellow. So I'm going to drop in here into the yellow and select it. And now you can see that fill color is that yellow. And I can come up here if I want to and adjust it a little, maybe brighten it up just a tiny bit. Don't get too far off from it. We don't want those yellows clashing. but we can go with that, hit OK. So now we've changed the fill color. I want to add a stroke to this, and so I'm going to click on the word stroke. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to the solid color, hit OK, and you can see that I do have a stroke color selected already, and it's not showing up much because it's a very small stroke at this point. It's only 2 pixels wide, and so we can click on this. This determines the size of that stroke, and we can adjust that, bring it up. So about 10 pixels looks pretty good. And let's see, trying to decide if I want to stay with the red. If you want to change the color, you can. You stay with the red, or maybe go to black, or use the blue in the shirt. Let's try yellow and blue. That looks pretty good. And hit OK. Now, if we select off of this, you can see that we have the basics for our lower third. And just to clean this up, now that we kind of have it in place, I'm going to turn the title action safe off, just so it cleans up our viewer there, helps us see it. Okay, so we've got that. Let's, I'm going to scroll just to look at our timeline down here. I'm going to scroll that closed a little bit and just clean it up so I can see what's going on here. So at this point, we've composited another layer, and it's that shape layer right there. So now we have 3 layers in our composition. We are building our composition. Let's add another image, a little logo area down here. Let's come back up to and make sure at this point that nothing is selected down here, because I do want to do a new shape layer. I don't want to add to this shape layer. You can add multiple shapes to one shape layer, but right now I don't want to do that. I want them separate. So I'm going to come here, make sure nothing is selected, come up to the rounded rectangle tool, click on it, hold. I want to just draw a circle now. So I'm going to go to the ellipse tool, select it, and as I click and drag, I'm going to hold down the shift key, and it's going to constrain the proportions so that I draw a perfect circle. So I'm going to hold down the shift key, then start clicking and dragging, and just get it to the size that I want, somewhere in there. Let go of everything, and I'm going to get my selection tool so that I can adjust this, move it into place. What I want is I want to put it down here, about right here. All right, let's change this colors. Let's change the colors up on this one. Let's see, let's try with a fill. Let's go fill color. I'm going to try that red. Maybe darken it a little bit. Yeah, that looks better. And the stroke color, let's see if we can, what white does. Yeah, I kind of like that. I know we're getting into some pretty basic colors here, but probably not the prettiest thing I got going on there, but it'll work for right now. All right, let's see. Just going to close that up. So now we've got our 2 basic shapes. Since Superman, as far as I understand it, is a DC character, let's add some text. This will be the first time we've added text. So you can see, again, we're building our composition. Make sure nothing's selected down here. It's really not going to matter too much with the text tool, but what we want to do is let's go get the text tool. Text tool is right up here. So far we've used the rectangle ellipse tool. Now we're going to add some text in here. Click on it. Come into the viewer, just anywhere in here so that you can see it. And let's type DC. And that's still in text mode, so an easy way to get out of that is just to come over to the selection tool, click on the selection tool, and now that layer is complete. We have this object and we can use it. And if you'll notice down here, now we have a 5th layer, which is also our text layer. So we have our text layer, our red shape, our yellow shape, and then our 2 background images there. So we want the DC to fit inside of here. So let's bring this down, click on it, drag down. At this point, the one that I have is too large, so I'm going to need to make sure that it's selected. And you can see that it has a bounding box there, and that lets me know that it is selected. Come over here to the character palette, and I'm just going to stick with the Helvetica at this point. You can choose whatever font that you want to. You can scroll through the fonts, play around with that for a few minutes. and choose whatever font you want to, but then I'm going to drag this down to fit inside of my circle. So for this, it's going to get down to around 114, somewhere in there. Then I'm just going to click and drag it into place, and then click off of everything. Kind of looks like the Dairy Queen logo also, but for right now this will work. Okay, so now we've got text and our shapes. We're building this lower third. Let's get his name in there. So we're going to need the text tool again. Click on it and just type in Ethan. Grab your selection tool so that we can get a hold of that. Drag it down into this area here for our lower third, and we can change that up. It's going to be a little bit smaller to fit in. Kind of fit it in there. And now at this point we have made a basic lower third. We've composited this image together from 6 different pieces, and we've made this lower third. All right, let's animate this lower third. Do this kind of quick so that we don't spend a lot more time on this tutorial, but basically we can start off, and a good way to do this, each layer has a visibility property here, and this is not anything that you animate. This is just so that while you're working you can clean up your workspace. What I want to do right now is, because I want to start with the 2 shapes. Actually, I want to start with this yellow shape, have it come in first. And so that I can see that more clearly, I'm just going to turn the visibility off for the other 3 layers, just so that I have this at this point. Okay, they're still there. We've not done any animation on them. This is not a property that you can animate. This is just to help you while you're working. So let's go to shape layer 1 here, and there are shortcut keys for all of these properties, the 5 basic properties. And remember, the 5 basic properties are anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And for the most part, the shortcut key on your keyboard it correlates with the first letter of the word. So anchor point would be A, position would be P, scale would be S, rotation would be R, but opacity is not O. Opacity is T. Opacity, transparency. So just remember that. So I want the position. I want to bring up just the position property. So I select that layer, hit P on my keyboard, and now I have just the position property right there. You can see that anchor point, which is a little weird for this, but it's right there. The anchor point for this object right there is located at 638 by 388. That's almost 640 by 360, almost in the center. Not going to worry about that right now. On these shape layers, sometimes they're not centered the way, but it's going to work for what we need to do right now. So I'm going to animate this, and I want to animate this coming in from this side. So I need to set the first position keyframe. So I've set the first keyframe here, and I'm going to, just so this is a little bit easier than grabbing the object, I'm going to just grab the X position there and start scrubbing to the right to pull that off, make sure it's off screen like that. And so we've set the first property. Take this animation, let it take about a second to come in, and we'll bring that back, and I think it's around 638. So I'm just going to go ahead and type that in, 638, hit enter. And so now we've got our first animation that comes in. All right, about right here. Well, let's do this. We'll animate the circle coming in from the other side. So let's go about 12 frames in here, in between these 2 keyframes, to start this object. Let's turn the visibility on. P for position. Let's set that keyframe right there. And let's go to about, on our timeline here, we can type this in. Just click that and go 112 and hit enter. That puts us at 1.5 seconds in the timeline. And to add a keyframe without changing any of our properties, and the reason I'm doing this is I want this to end up right here. I know that's the ending position, so I set that first keyframe. It has the same properties. We'll go back and adjust that in just a minute. This is a different way of working, but I can set, without changing the properties, I can set a keyframe. So I have a keyframe there. It does have those properties, and they're the same properties as the first keyframe. So you can do some hold keyframes like that. So if I want it to hold a position in between two keyframes, I can do that. But now I'm going to change the position of this so that we actually create an animation. I'm going to drag this X position off to the right, to the left. And so now what's going to happen, if we drag through here, the rectangle is going to come in from the right side, then the circle is going to come in from the left side, and they're going to stop and meet in the same position. Now, I'm going to remind you of this. These two keyframes always need different properties to make an animation. I did that one a little bit differently, and sometimes you can work, it's kind of like working backwards. If you know the final position of your graphic, you can start there and then work backwards. And that's kind of what I did on this. So just want you to know that if you accidentally set both of those at the same property, that you do need to have a difference where this one is at 186 and 360 on the position. Then we go to the next one, and it's at 640 by 360. So there is a change in those two properties. So there's an animation there. All right, so now at this point we've got these two objects coming in. So we've created that animation. Let's get our text to start coming in. And I'm going to wait until these two are in and probably bring in the DC first. So we can hit the visibility on that. And for this one, let's see. Yeah, we'll just do a simple fade. So to fade this in, we're going to use the opacity. And the shortcut key for that is T. So select the DC layer, hit T, and you have opacity right there. You have the opacity property. And let's set our first keyframe by clicking on the stopwatch. And let's drag this down to 0 so that it's out when we start this animation. It is completely faded out. And let's go another second in, give that a second. So we're at 212 on the timeline here. And let's drag that back up to 100% opacity. So now what we've done is DC. We've got the rectangle coming in, the circle coming in, and then the DC fading in on top of it. All right, and we can do the same now with his title. And you can start around 2 seconds in there. Go to select the layer Ethan, make sure that we turn the visibility back on, and hit T for opacity. Let's set that first keyframe by hitting that stopwatch. So we've set that first keyframe. Let's change this value down to 0 so that we start it off at 0 and it can fade in. Go about a second in, that would put us at 3 seconds. And let's drag that opacity value back up to 100%, and that sets that second keyframe. All right, so now we have a full animation with this lower third coming in. So this is compositing, kind of the basics of compositing. We have a layered image here with 6 layers going on it, and 4 of them being animated. We could animate the background and Ethan's picture if we wanted to, but for this, basically just trying to demonstrate a lower third. Just some simple animations, just some simple shapes to make this graphic work, but this is the basics of compositing.